What's going on, everyone? I've got a fun video for you all today. As you all know, I love making tier lists, and I also love making tier lists before the cards are even in the game. And as such, we get to go back and kind of roast my previous self, talk about some of the placements that I've made for some of these leaders from set 5, how they've shaped up pre and post force throw ban, and then ranking them on the list currently in relation to set 5 in general. If we were to put these on a list comparing against all the other leaders in the format, well, unfortunately for set 5 leaders, they would not perform all that well, as only a few of these have even been competitively viable, and even then they haven't been immensely competitively viable. It's really the rest of the set that has performed excellently. That said, there are some that really were standouts at the beginning of the format, and some that are still doing well today, and there are some that I got absolutely wrong. And really, it's either, only like 3 or 4 of them that I rated really high or really low, when in reality they were the opposite. Most of the C's and D's that I had put on the list beforehand were relatively accurate, so we get to roast a few of them, and it's going to be a good time. A big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon who helped me test a lot of the leaders back in the day. It feels like so long ago since we initially got these guys announced. Now we are almost done with set 6 spoilers, so it's going to be a fun time with that. But let's dive and talk about the tiers real quick. Alrighty, for the tiers here, we've got the S tier. These are going to be the leaders that are actually still strong competitive options in the meta right now. If you were to bring this to a tournament, you actually have a decent chance of winning. Mind you, the S tier in the set 5 category doesn't necessarily mean they are S tier leaders over the course of all time across all other leaders. As I said, this is going to be in relation to set 5 itself. So the S tiers are just competitively viable options that are still very, very solid. May not be like top 5 or anything like that. We'll talk about that in a moment, but they are still solid options. A tier are going to be the ones that definitely did some work. They do have a cohesive strategy. They have a pretty strong either ability or something that kind of really made the deck function and were a decent threat. And these ones are still competitively viable, but it's not one that you're expecting to have a really good chance of winning a tournament or a decent chance of winning a tournament when you're bringing it to the more popular like planetary qualifiers, sector qualifiers, etc. B tier, these are certainly your store showdown, your kind of more just interesting strategy style of decks where they do potentially something strong. Either it's very inconsistent or it really folds to some of the more popular decks. The C tiers, these are going to be the ones that at least have something going for them. Unlike the B tier where they could do something pretty strong, maybe it's inconsistent, the C tiers, they do at least something, but that something may not be good, or it's so horribly inconsistent that you barely ever pull it off, and even then when you do pull it off, it's not actually really that conducive to winning. And then the D tier are like, dude, why am I even playing this guy? Like, what is going on? Like, am I even doing anything with the cards I'm trying to put together here? Those are going to be the D tier. And there are certainly some D tier and C tier, but there are also a couple, A tier, S tier as well. And we get to dive into our first ones with the Vigilance leaders first. So our first one up is Kylo Ren. Now, this guy's pretty interesting, as when I spoke about Kylo Ren very initially on, I put him in like the low B tier / potentially high C tier, depending on where the meta is going to show up. That was my initial ranking. And I will say this, right off the bat, this is probably the biggest flop of the list in terms of what I ranked, because he is by far, as of right now, the strongest Legends of the Force leader in terms of what he is capable of. And if you look back before Force Throw ban, he still was arguably the strongest Legends of the Force leader. He ended up being in the finals for the Galactic Championship as well with another leader on here. But before Force Throw, he was this incredible Kylo Ren, sort of not really like a super like cohesive, I'm going to grind you out style of deck, which is what I thought Kylo Ren was going to be. It was a true combo list, in what I would call the most combo list that we really had in Star Wars Unlimited, where you would just be completely disruptive and you would just deploy Kylo and do absolutely insane work. Before Force Throw ban, that was the key. However, even in the realm of after Force Throw ban, Kylo Red still exists. But more importantly, Kylo Data Vault also still exists, and Kylo Data Vault had no effect on Force Throw being banned because it was literally just like your Kira Data Vault list, but with Kylo instead. And you also added in things like Craving Power or even some Heroism cards. One of the things that I didn't really think about at the time with Kylo Ren, well, I guess there's two things depending on the deck you're choosing. If you're talking about Kylo Ren, I didn't really think about the potential for this action just to give you so much value with cards like Migs. That was a huge reason as to why Kylo Ren was so disgusting. It was just impossible to do anything up against Kylo in the early game for some decks. And then for Kylo Data Vault, it ended up just being a better, kind of mid-range / soft control. It was more in the soft control area, and in Kylo's case, sometimes hard control, than the other ones out there. So like if you're playing Kira Data Vault, which was a hugely popular deck, Kylo Data Vault was just better. It was just better. You had a better leader deploy, you had more value in your resource pile, and you could just put more pressure on and deal with your opponent's pressure a lot easier. With that discard being able to give you basically that filter that you really needed to find the cards that you really wanted, like restock, vigilance, etc. That is really the strength of Kylo Ren, and he is an absolute S tier. If you were to combine all the lists that he is really playing right now, he actually ends up being I think this is like top, it's not like incredibly good, okay, compared to the rest of the leaders, but I think he's like 7th or 8th in terms of top 8s across the board for set 5 post suspension. If you're talking about pre-suspension, he was even stronger. So he is the best leader from set 5. Spoiler alert, I guess. And he is only like top 7. So if you were to compare this to the rest of, let's say, the leaders in the format, he probably would end up as like a high A tier for me, potentially like a low S tier. He is certainly a strong one, and it is just amazing how well he has performed overall. And one of the other cards that I felt like really boosted him up was the Anakin Skywalker. I mean, the card has been absolutely amazing, but he is one of the few leaders that truly can trigger it super consistently on both sides, right? The heroism and villainy card in your discard pile, because you're guaranteed to discard what you want when you want it in Kylo Ren. The second one, and we're kind of following up powerhouse to powerhouse here with Vigilance, is Mother Talzin. Now, Mother Talzin is quite interesting. If you look at pre-suspension, this was a leader that people were really high on. Really high on. I was never as big of a fan of Mother Talzin as a lot of other people were in terms of the meta overall. However, this is a leader that I did put in S tier in my initial ranking, and guess what? She is still S tier. Now, she definitely didn't perform, as well, like in general, that I was hoping she would, even though I was lower on Talzin than other people were. So she was a little bit disappointing in terms of that, but she was a huge contender for a lot of people wanting to play new set 5 decks, and she was the winner of the Galactic Championship. So there is a couple of very impressive feats with Mother Talzin. Pre-Force Throw suspension, this is one of the better Force Throw decks, and it was a huge reason as to how she could deal with a lot of different options out there. In the post-Force Throw ban realm, she honestly is a lot weaker. We're not even breaking like top 15 in terms of the top 8 finishes. I guess it's, tied with maybe like the 15th or 16th place deck with 7 top 8s. With Mother Talzin Red is really the deck that people were running. There wasn't really any other iteration. I was thinking maybe Talzin Green could happen because of just the strength of being that little soft control list where you had a Kira kind of comparison similar to Kylo, but just going bigger was what you wanted to do in that style. And so you really wanted to play a more tempo focused, disruptive list. And that's where Mother Talzin Red came in. And she did do very well. And again, in terms of how I placed her and how I would place her now, it is no change at all. Talzin in the S tier, just a solid one. Next up, we've got Ahsoka Tano. This one, I think I initially placed her in the D tier, and I would place her in the D tier again. I have not seen a single Ahsoka list whatsoever, even in like the random top 8 finishes where you have some weird decks show up. I've not seen a single Ahsoka list anywhere where anyone's trying to play Ahsoka. I think the biggest thing is when you're playing these force-based decks, yes, you could play a lot of cards that pay you off, but if you're going to use the action on it, you better have a good payoff for using that force. Talzin is a great example of a really solid action. It can either finish off units, shrink units to where you can kill them and not take as much damage. That's really, really powerful, especially since a lot of units in the game will trade with 1 HP remaining. Ahsoka, on the other hand, getting this Sentinel just never did enough. The fact that you needed to generate the force and then be able to use the action, and if you didn't have initiative, you suddenly didn't really get as much value out of your Sentinel, was just too weak. Her deploy isn't too bad, but there was really nothing else going for her. And the fact that she was heroism really, really hindered the vigilance aspect, right? Like, if you're playing a vigilance leader and you're not playing villainy, you really, really are just in a bad way. Unless you have a leader like, for example, Yoda, which is really benefiting from that, or a leader like Han, who can utilize the advanced resources that you have to get your powerful vigilance trading tools ahead early. Unfortunately, Ahsoka Tano doesn't really have that. It doesn't have a way to recoup the board at that point, because all you're getting is a 6 to deploy, 5-6 that can give some Sentinel, right? In the pre-Force Throw ban world, well, Ahsoka Red, I did play. It wasn't that good. Force Throw was a good card, but it wasn't anything special. In the Force Throw run, it didn't really matter. Again, Ahsoka as a leader never really took any stride. Next up, we've got Kanan. Now, Kanan is the last Vigilance leader, and I believe initially I put him as high S tier or low S tier or high A tier is where I initially put him. And this is another one that I definitely got wrong. As of right now, we really haven't seen any Kanan either, and so that is a huge knock against him. I would put him in the C tier. His leader ability does do at least something. There is some obnoxious circumstances where you put a shield token on, like I don't know, it could be really anything, but like an Ezra, for example, or any creature or specter, that is, or a Sabine, and you can get some really nice value going there. There is times where that is the case, or put a shield on a Lothwolf and be just super obnoxious. So there is like that little bit of value generated, but the problem is that there's not enough consistency when it comes to Kanan, in terms of a lot of the strategies that you want to go for. Yes, you can play a specter strategy, but is that strategy going to be good enough? Generally not. And if you are going for that, then the kind of soft control lists that are in the meta a lot, like Kylo or Kira or Iden, just eat Kanan up. Another card that's really devastating against Kanan is Darth Vader, and we're seeing a lot of Darth Vader. Another one that's really tricky is, well, Boba Data Vaults. I mean, the indirect damage, it just, doesn't even care about the shields. You don't even care about that. Just go all to space. There are so many different things that really mess up Kanan. I played him in the pre-Force Throw and post-Force Throw meta. Pre-Force Throw in Kanan Red was solid. Honestly, I've always leaned towards Kanan Double Blue with Doom and trying to get some value, because you do have those shields really pumping out, you are allowing your units to survive. So Doom can be pretty nice. You can put a shield on Doom. But Kanan Red, I think, was still solid and definitely better when Force Throw was in the meta, and then post-Force Throw, which I did run back to Kanan, and, well, he's just a little bit worse, right? So nothing too powerful with Kanan that he ever really did. No really deck that was like truly great. It does a little bit of something, but not enough to even come out of the bottom of the list. That moves us on to the command aspect here. And we have another leader in Morgan Elspeth that I'm not 100% sure if I rated her C tier or D tier. But to be honest, the C tier and D tier are so close to me. And you know what? She's a C tier. She's like a low C tier, maybe a high D tier. I mean, honestly, again, these things are so close that if you wanted to swap those the two tiers and say something about that, I would not blame you. But Morgan Elspeth never really did a whole lot. And you know what? I'm just gonna put her straight up in D tier. There is like some cool things you can. No. I'm literally arguing with myself right now, because I know there's someone. You know who you are, my patron, who's like, dang, Elspeth Yellow is pretty solid. And you know what? There is some cool things you could do with like raid and like being able to match raid together, so you can accelerate the cost, and you can do something like the ambush and restore and settle and all that good stuff, which is what she's trying to do. The problem with Morgan Elspeth is that you need to have attacked with that unit. You need to have that unit match an aspect that has, an aspect in your hand. and then you get the resource discount. We talked about Jabba in the past, where Jabba was like, oh, you can get some resource discounts. That's pretty cool. But then you have to put an action on an opponent's unit. You have to kill that unit. They see it coming. It's the same thing with Morgan Elspeth, right? You have to attack first, then it has to not die, then you get the resource discount, then you have to share an aspect, then also she's a 5 to deploy 3/6, which I have a lot of problems with that for another leader that we'll talk about later. But yeah, she is just kind of all over the place. I really want to put her in D tier, but I have that one little, but the raid, it's so good, so I'm gonna put her in C tier and leave it there. That said, we've got Snoke next up, and this is a leader, another one where, and Morgan Elspeth, I did put her in C or D tier. I think I mentioned that earlier, but pretty on point with that one. Snoke is one that I put pretty high up. I believe he was in the S or A tier for me, and I would definitely drop him below into B tier. He is not one that was nearly as impressive as I was hoping. The problem with it is that a lot of the combinations that you're going to try to run with Snoke, it was just better if you played Command Villainy Vigilance. And who would have guessed, playing him as somewhat of a pseudo win con and being able to get some value then just wasn't good enough, especially in the force throw meta. You just got Snoke killed for one resource. In the post force throw meta, Snoke did do a little bit better, but he never really was someone that gained a whole lot of traction. Now, Snoke Red actually did show up in a top 8, so at least of the leaders that we just spoke about, he did at least do something. And he did something reasonably well. He's very consistent, but the consistency it's just not very powerful. And so unless you had something like, if you were playing like Snoke Yellow, for example, and you were trying to go the same strategies like Tarkin and using like the Imperial TIE Phantom in that game plan, well, Snoke just deploys later. So you weren't able to get as effective as a curve out as Tarkin was back in the day. But also, if you're trying to go for other units that, aren't specifically Imperial, which is kind of the strength of Snoke, because you do any villainy unit, well, there just wasn't enough payoff to go ahead and get a lot of value out of him. So in the B tier, he did do some work, but just wasn't all that powerful. Next up, we've got Avar Kriss. Now, Avar Kriss is not someone who I thought was going to be all that powerful. I believe I put her in like the middle of the pack, like a B tier. And the reason I said that is because it's just difficult to deploy her, guys. And I know people were coming up with some strategies to deploy her a lot earlier, but as I had mentioned at the time, it is just super difficult to get multiple force triggers in a turn and, get her earlier than potentially like 7 resources. Like 7 resource deploy isn't that unlikely, but if you're getting her on 7 resources, you really need to construct a deck to be able to get you there. And so you're playing like Avar Red or Avar Blue, and you were potentially playing some removal and doing all that shenanigans. And what ended up happening was you should just play a better deck, a better leader. And so I'm going to put her in the C tier. She's a little bit weaker than what I initially was hoping for her. I was hoping that the guaranteed force action was going to do some work with some cards like Infused Brawler, or the fact that you could guarantee it with Kiadi Mundi or whatever. But the problem was that a lot of these cards that utilize the force, in heroism especially, aren't really doing a whole lot of work for you if you're behind on board anyways. So you really wanted to be ahead on board, and that's where the force really comes into its own. And we see this with other decks like Han as an example, or even like both Hans with the new post force throw meta. And then, of course, if you include the post force throw meta, you lost force throw to kind of get you to the late game as a 1 resource interaction if you are going that route with Avar Red, which I do think is kind of the better of the options. It just ended up being a little bit weaker than I was hoping, so just a little bit lower than what I initially rated. Next up, we've got Obi-Wan. This is another one where I put in the S tier alongside, actually, it was S or high A tier. It was low S tier, high A tier for Obi-Wan. This is one that I thought was going to be very, very powerful. And honestly, with Obi-Wan, oh, by the way, Avar didn't show up at all. But Obi-Wan actually did have a few different showings, with Obi-Wan Blue specifically. Now, it wasn't a crazy amount, but we had 3 top 8 finishes, so it actually did do at least something. It did do a good amount of work, and Obi-Wan's ability actually is very powerful. I'm going to keep this in the A tier. And again, you might be thinking like, oh my gosh, you put Obi-Wan in the A tier. What is this guy thinking? I mean, is this guy even qualified to make these videos? Yes, I am, because I'm just a random and I'm just giving my opinion. So my qualifications are, I just do whatever the heck I want. And you guess what? Everyone's an A tier, okay? For at least in comparison to the rest of the leaders here, okay? Let's just be honest here. The competition is not stiff, all right? So it's going to be sparse to see those A tiers. I do think there's a huge drop off from the S tier on this list and the A tier. Okay, let's make that very, very clear. However, in terms of what these leaders were able to accomplish, the A tier for Obi-Wan makes a lot of sense. He does have some very strong abilities going for him. Being able to instantly grow in a lot of cases, a lot of your units to that higher amount power and toughness is very, very powerful. And we got to see a lot of Virgin's Temple Obi-Wan, things like Yaddle turn 1 to get you that force immediately to make her a 3-5 was just a good play. And so that's something that really helped out Obi-Wan. And then of course, because he was an early deploy and you had the Vigilance backing, you had things like Shatterpoint and other options, even like a Jedi lightsaber on Obi-Wan. There are just so many different options with that Vigilance category, but being able to grow your units was really, really important. And that ability is just really, really good. It's a nice payoff for your force token. Arguably one of the best, if not the best uses of the force on a leader ability. Talzin and Obi-Wan are the number 1 and number 2. I do think Obi-Wan's actually better than Talzin in terms of, the action itself. The difference is Talzin's in a way better aspect combination. The strategy fits her better. It also has a way better leader flip and a better stat line. So that's what puts Talzin way over the edge. However, I think Obi-Wan's ability is definitely one of the best. If he was not a 3-6, which again, I talked about earlier, if he was like a 3-7 or maybe a 4-6, maybe a little bit more aggressive, actually. A 4-6, I think, would have fit him better, even though he is a Ceresu user, besides the point. I think he would have done a lot better. But yes, A tier, he actually did have, like I said, multiple top 8 showings, which was pretty impressive for a leader in comparison to a lot of other ones on the list today. Next up, we've got the aggression leaders. So let's dive into Darth Maul. All right, so for Darth Maul, in terms of the showings from one of the more populated tournaments, we had nothing show up for Darth Maul. That said, I think this is one of those leaders that was just not very popular, but I actually think was a lot stronger than, we had initially, or I should say I had initially rated. So I started Darth Maul down in the C tier because I was like, the force ability just not really doing a whole lot. There isn't really like an amazing amount of options that you have, and you also have to generate the force and, all this stuff. However, in certain matchups, this can be pretty powerful. So I think this is one of those cases where very inconsistently, but very good depending on the matchup. For example, if you're playing Virgin's Temple Maul and you go like a turn 1 play that generates the force for you, you can destroy a Vader. Like if you have the initiative, you play your 4 toughness unit on turn 1. It could be all manner of different units like Karis, for example. And then your opponent goes like some random TIE fighter and another TIE fighter or like Kijimi patrollers. Boom, you just wiped out that whole strategy from Darth Vader. And you can continuously do that. Pre-Force Throw, he was even stronger because you were playing things like Karis and Force Throw and you're just dominating everything and you're able to crush people's boards. You're playing a more controlling style, usually with Maul Blue, as I said, with Virgin Temple being able to generate the force immediately for you so your opponent can do anything. So there were some matchups that were really, really good for Maul. Really, really good. However, it was very, very inconsistent. And that always hinders a deck for sure. But honestly, it is one of the better use the force abilities than we have on the list that actually was able to do something. So Maul, a little bit better than I gave credit for. I just wasn't really seeing the vision. Not that the vision was way better or anything. It was just slightly better than I had initially rated, which was down in the C tier. Next up, we've got Third Sister, and I was reasonably excited for this one. I was thinking she would be somewhere in the B tier as like a maybe aggressive leader because of Hidden. However, as it turns out, a 5-4 stat line is still just bad. 5 to deploy 5-4s, as we saw with IG, it is still pretty bad. Now, there are some aggressive things you can do. Another leader that really had 0 showings in the top 8 finishes in terms of the more popular tournaments. So really nothing that we could see in terms of a competitive sense. And honestly, again, 4 toughness is brutal. And you really weren't offering anything else. Like, yes, you can give hidden to some units, but to be honest, the decks that were fighting units with units, oftentimes we're just going to kill or trade with your earlier units anyways. And then the decks that are controlling you are just going to kill your units no matter what, because they don't care about hidden. Power of the dark side, takedowns, all that good stuff, just doesn't care. And then a lot of decks just went way over the top of Third Sister. Now, I do think she was a deck that benefited from Force Throw being in the meta in some senses, but I also think she really got hindered because Force Throw is meta, because again, it was just another way to one resource kill your leader, even though she had hit him. I think she made out a little bit better than what she lost with Force Throw being banned. However, she didn't make out really all that much better. I do think she is okay, because there are some situations where you can really get some aggression out and do something with the early deploy leader and having 5 toughness on it, but that's pretty much all you get. That's pretty much all you get from Third Sister. Outside of that, it's pretty weak. Next up, we've got Kit Fisto. Oh my gosh. I think I put Kit Fisto in the D tier. And guys, Kit Fisto, again, did not show up at all in the top 8s or anything like that. No good finishes for this guy here. And guess what? ECL, Force Throw being in the meta, a lot of controlling decks. You were not getting a lot of Jedi on the board. You were not. And at most, you'd have a 3-6 on deploy with Saboteur. The only thing that was relevant about Kit Fisto was his front side action, and the front side action really did not fit the game plan of what Kit Fisto was trying to do. I'm putting this guy in the D tier. I know. You could argue, what is this he do? He's gonna do 2 damage to something. Wow. Nah. Okay. 1-6. What are they thinking with a 1-6? He should at least have been a 3-6. If he was a 3-6, I could see something going on with Kit Fisto. He might have been able to be like low B tier if he was a 3-6, okay? The fact that he comes down, and let's just think about this for a second. Even the more aggressive decks like Sabine, who's super early deploy in the game, right? You're oftentimes at most having 3 units on the board. If you have more than that, you're probably already won. Your opponent can never come back, right? Most of the time, if you're looking at the competitive options. 3 units on the board, including your leader, by the way. That is a 3-6 Saboteur. You are getting an understated leader after really building your deck around those Jedi. Okay? That is horrible. It just is. If he was a 3-6, you'd have a 5-6 on 5. That's not bad. We have Ahsoka Tano, for crying out loud. And that was a 3. You had 3 units on the board in the Ahsoka deck. You had a 5-6. Ahsoka's not even playable, okay? Now, Kit Fisto is a better leader than Ahsoka, in my opinion. That said, his leader ability is still just okay. It's just okay. There are some situations where it can do some work. I mean, 1 resource to deal 2 damage to a unit is good. It just doesn't fit what Kit Fisto was trying to do, and that's the problem. If he was a more controlling leader, like maybe a 6 to deploy, and really helped you come back into the game, and was played more of a mid-range style, that could have been a little bit more interesting. But there's just not enough payoff for Kit Fisto's deploy in of itself. This is a situation where his leader ability was actually, in my opinion, a little bit above what I think some of these other leaders' abilities are, but his leader side is so far below that it just completely negates any benefit that you had with Kit Fisto. This is one of those decks where, okay, I'm going to slam a bunch of Jedi in my list to make his front side action work and grow him on the other side, and it's just like, it just doesn't do anything. It just doesn't do anything. I don't know, guys. Yes, I know some Kit Fisto green players are there like squirming, like, oh no, he doesn't know, guys. He doesn't know. Keep putting our Kit Fisto in the D tier, please. I'm sorry. Like I said, we're no holds barred. We are just running into this tier list today, okay? Let me know in the comment section. Let me know how mad you are right now. Please. All right, next up we've got Rey, and this was an immediate D tier. I know I put her in the D tier. I know I put her at the last spot in the D tier, and she's going in the last spot in D tier again. This is one that was horrible when she started, and she's horrible now. There is nothing going for Ray. You know what? Honestly, if I'm going to be generous to Fisto now. If Ray's in the D tier, these guys got to be in the C tier. To be honest, that's just how bad Ray is. Now, I'm not going to do that because I know you Fisto lovers are just squirming right now, but Ray was truly bad. There are some force cards out there, okay? There's like just like no reason to build a deck where you're like playing all these non-unit force cards and then trying to get value out of them, but then getting 1 damage as the payoff and then having a 7 to deploy leader that, you know, kind of tries to refill your hand. I mean, it's just like, this is like attempt to be a spell slinger leader or an event slinger leader, and it just does nothing. It does like absolutely nothing. Super late to deploy. The action is not paying you off. You have to play force units in order for you to generate the force, to play a lot of the force cards, or to have a lot of the force cards be relevant. Think like force throw, for example, or you know, what's the forces with me, for example. These are force events that you would be playing in Ray that are not playable unless you're playing the unit force card. So if you were to lose your units, your deck does literally nothing, like literally nothing. And then it's not like your leader is going to win you the game. This is an atrocious leader. I mean, I have not seen any Ray decks whatsoever do anything. I've had games where like my opponent's playing like Ray Yellow or Ray Blue or whatever, and they've done their whole thing. They've been removing all my units. They deployed Ray. They filled up their hand. They had no cards in hand. They did some cool things, and they just lost. Just because Ray does nothing. I mean, it just does nothing. I mean, like, legitimately building your deck around trying to play a lot more of these force cards to get the Ray triggers ended up making their deck oftentimes weaker than just playing a standard force deck, which we know, if you've played some set 5, that's the true power of set 5. It's not necessarily all the leaders, it's actually the cards within the set and the force synergies. So trying to build around this leader, it just makes your deck so much worse. And it's very similar to, you know, like a lot of the other leaders around here. But that's the aggression leaders. I know I'm having a little bit of fun with this. Okay, guys, it's all in good fun. Some of these leaders, you know, I'm roasting them because I'm also roasting myself. But we get to move on to Cunning next with Barris. Barris is next up, and this is one that I believe was in the low A tier or high B tier when I initially rated Barris. I was excited, okay? I was excited for the potential of doing the nasty combos, doing some like now there are 2 of them shenanigans, doing something by being able to cheapen the cost of your events with the force. It seems like a good use of the force, right? Getting resource discounts. We love resource discounts. I mean, look at the best leaders in the format, right? Han and Han. Ooh, well, both Hans are some of the best leaders in the format. I mean, well, we've got to like resource discounts, right? Well, Barris is a little bit on the weaker side. Yes, you got the resource discount, but you had to play a force unit. In Cunning Villainy, you had less choices than other options. That is a big hindrance. And then the payoff just wasn't really there. You did have a 6.47, which is not a bad stat line for a leader. This is one where is it just a C tier? It's just a C tier. I think she's just a C tier. There was no showing of Barris anywhere. I don't really think there was a big payoff. You could go a couple different directions. I tried Barris Green and Barris Blue and Barris Red. Barris Red obviously playing the kind of raid shenanigans that allowed you to deploy a bunch of things earlier and getting the combo kill, which is kind of fun. Ray Blue just kind of being a value list where you play, you know, cheap events, things like Power of the Dark Side for 2 resources. Like that's just, you know, that's just solid. You could double spell on a certain turn, double event. But really the or you know, like Barris Scream where you can go like Overwhelming Barrage on turn 3 instead of turn 4. So that type of stuff was pretty cool, and everything that was going along with that. There's not enough force cards to be able to generate the force consistently if you're trying to play a lot of the cards that are working with Barris, and that's a big problem. And the fact that you get that resource discount on events is not nearly as powerful as on units. Units allow you to really press your advantage. Events oftentimes allow you to keep your advantage or bring the game back. And in a deck that wants to be playing units to generate the force, to then use that force to keep the advantage, it's just too many things going on. and you weren't able to get a lot of value out of it. I mean, think about like Cunning Villainy as well, and like what you're trying to do with that style of deck. It's usually that you're playing Surprise Strikes, McClunky sometimes, and getting some value there. It's not like she was horrible. It's just it's not an A tier or B tier that I had put her in. Grand Inquisitor's next, and I had pretty low hopes of this guy. I was thinking he could do like maybe something in the C tier. Honestly, I mean, he is a D. He is a D tier. Okay, but this guy, Cunning Villainy. We have a force that, or an action that I honestly had low expectations for initially. I just looked at this guy and I was like, yeah, this is basically just like more convoluted Jin Urso from set 1. For those of you that remember the Jin Urso from set 1. And then you had a flip side, a 3-5? A 5 resource 3-5? What are we playing, Chirrut again? I mean, this is nonsense. That we've got shielded on him, and like he can do some cool things by trading with other units. But with a Cunning Villainy leader, you don't want to be hitting other units. You want to be hitting the base. You want to be going to base, or getting enough value out of your leader to play the mid-range grind, but he's not enough value. Like, yes, a 3-5 shielded and shrinking opponents' units by attacking them isn't bad, but he also dies to takedown. He also doesn't do a lot of damage to base. He doesn't put a lot of pressure on your opponent. He also, oftentimes, if you attack a unit, let's say like a K2SO, doesn't kill him. And guess what? You still lose your shield token. And if they ECL Poe Dameron, it's like really bad. I mean, like, it is just, there's so many different things that are really, really bad about Grand Inquisitor. This is another one where I try to play like Grand Inquisitor red, get the force throw early and everything, but honestly, I mean, it just wasn't really all that good. In pre-force throw and post-force throw, it just didn't really hit its stride. There was nothing really strong about Grand Inquisitor. You don't really want to be using this action to shrink down units to try to trade with things. It's just too many actions in a row. If you ever had, and you would start to miss initiative, which means that your opponent could attack immediately before you could even use your action. It just didn't end up really adding altogether, which was no real surprise to me. Again, if you play back in set 1 and you're looking at this guy and you're like, yeah, that's like a Jin Urso ability. You're like, yeah, that's not very good. And guess what? He wasn't very good. Draft, this guy was kind of sick. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of sick in draft. Next up, we've got Cal Kestis. This is one that I also had pretty low expectations for. I believe I put him in the C tier, and he's going to go in the C tier for me again. Early deploy leader, I was kind of excited about. Got the force tag, kind of cool. The fact that he has no other tags beside the force tag is kind of sad. And also the fact that he's a 3-4 is just mediocre at best. Like, at best. I know he attacks with the same amount of damage as Sabine, but he has 1 less toughness, and the 4th to 5th toughness is super important. There are so many more 4-powered units in the game than 5-powered units, and this guy dies to the 4-powered units. That is a nightmare scenario. He also dies to open fire, dies to aggression, dies to force throw when it was in the meta, died to every single card you can imagine. Not to mention that his action of being able to, exhaust units wasn't really as powerful as, something like the Django was used to doing, right? And I know I'm like, whoa, you're comparing to Django. Chill. That guy's banned. Okay, we're talking about C tier set 5 leader, which is more like a D tier leader in the grand scheme of things, right? Well, the reason I mentioned is because we're playing tempo-oriented exhaustive leaders to prevent your opponent from using their abilities or actions or units or whatever it is. And Cal, even though you could exhaust a ready unit, right? The fact that you had to generate the force first and then use a separate action to make them exhaust a unit is what made that worse. You had to use another action. Cards like Django, really, you just slammed it, and boom, you played a unit, boom, you got to exhaust something, you got to did everything all in once. That's the power of that, okay? So Cal, a little bit low on the stat line. If he was like a 3-5, maybe there was something more to do. Maybe he was like a B tier leader. Or if he had a leader action that actually benefited the aggro playstyle that you're looking for, maybe there was something there. Next up in the last Cunning leader was actually Qui-Gon Jinn. Now, Qui-Gon is someone that I had high hopes for, not because I thought he was going to be extremely powerful, but because I thought he was doing some cool things. And to be honest, he ended up being exactly where I thought he was going to be, doing some cool things. Occasionally, he actually did have, I believe, 1 or 2 top 8s. I think it was 1 top 8 finish across set 5 in terms of more populated tournaments. I'm going to put him on the higher end of B tier. he does do some cool things, and he does them pretty consistently, to be honest. It's just that those cool things sometimes can be a little dirtly, and the value you're generating isn't enough to keep him in the game. I do think the best aspect combination is really to trigger the when plays over and over again, and the best aspect combination to do that in is Vigilance. Now, in double Cunning, you can utilize things like Cantina Bouncer over and over again, but the best card by far is Anakin. If you're able to double trigger Anakin and then be able to loop that guy, like, oh, I play Anakin, I bounce Anakin back to my hand, I play Plo Koon, ambush your thing, or play whatever other 5-drop, and then I replay Anakin for a double trigger, and then I bounce it back to my hand. That is an extremely powerful loop. Extremely powerful loop. And you could also do things like, bouncing some random units and getting another trigger out of your 3-drop, or getting another trigger out of Ahsoka or Kira or whatever it is that you have in the earlier game, and keep on kind of going through that game plan, right? You're able to really trigger those ambushers, really trigger those when played effects, and do some cool things and get a lot of value generated. The problem is that's very dirtily, when I say dirtily, I mean like kind of like doing a lot of actions for not a lot of gain. and a lot of times it just takes a lot of time. And so that's kind of what Qui-Gon's the king of, being able to just really, really do a lot of things and not really do a lot of things at the same time. And so despite him getting a lot of value, maybe discarding a lot of your cards in hand, or, getting a lot of value on board, you needed to kind of have some key cards in order for this to be really, truly strong. So he was able to consistently do some solid things, but inconsistently do the truly powerful things. And again, I'm talking about like the double trigger Anakin into bounce into play Plo Koon, and that type of stuff is what would win you the game. That would be really tough to come back from, as we've seen with how powerful Anakin is. Or even like a Luke Skywalker into Anakin, that type of stuff is what really, really pushed him over the edge in some matchups, right? But overall, he ended up being a very B tier leader. Again, you could put him, all of these leaders are not like B tier, again, in the grand scheme of things, but he did do some cool things in comparison to a lot of the rest of the set 5 leaders. And then we get to the greatest travesty of all, the greatest disappointment that I've had in the entirety of Star Wars Limited. And it's not like I was going to expect him to be good, okay? I think I put Revan in C or even D tier. He's going in D tier, okay? He's going in D tier. I know people try to play this guy. I saw him doing at least getting some wins at the Galactic Championship. I sat down with someone who was 4-0 with a Revan Yellow and went through their deck in person. It's not that the deck was good at all. It was that people were so shocked that people were even playing Revan that he was actually winning maybe 1 or 2 games, okay? We saw no top 8 finishes in terms of popular tournaments for Revan. Now, that's no surprise because his action or his leader ability pumped up your units whenever you're able to attack and defeat a unit. You had to attack that unit and defeat it in order to get that experience token. That's a lot of difficulty, okay? There were a lot of times where you get 1 or 2 experience tokens and do something like that. But then what is your payoff? Oh, I'm going to grow a couple of units. Maybe I can assemble an army. Okay, let's flip my... Oh, it's a 3-6 again? Oh, stop giving me 3-6s, FFG. Stop, please. I can't handle it, especially on my favorite leader of all time. Guys, if this guy was a 4-6, oh, this would be so much better. Honestly, you could print him as a 5-6, and I still don't think he would be all that viable. Yes, you would be able to kill units and get a little bit of value on your Revan leader and maybe pump it up. And then if your opponent didn't have the exact answer, yes, maybe the 5-6 would have won some games. But that's what Revan should have been. He should have been like a 5-6 and like getting in some damage, okay? The fact that you're missing an aspect is a huge detriment, right? Especially since you were trying to play him in these 4-style decks. And with only one aspect, you just do not have the greatest selection of turn 1 options to be able to utilize that. If you look at like decks like Talzin, for example, and I know Talzin's like at the very opposite end of the spectrum, but if you're playing like Talzin Red, you still only had so many more turn 1 options. You had Secretive Sage, Karos, Acolyte, and all of those cards, all, you know, across multiple aspects. Then you can play Grand Inquisitor on turn 2, right, because of the secondary aspect. If you're playing aggression in Townsend or in Revan, let's say, and you're trying to utilize Force Throw in the earlier stages of the meta, well, now you don't get access to Karos or Secretive Sage. You have so many less options on turn 1. But if you're playing Vigilance, well, now you don't get access to a lot of the aggression powerhouses like Fallen Lightsaber on your Revan or Force Throw at the time. In post Force Throw meta, well, didn't really change all that much because honestly, I mean, it was just overall pretty weak. And even though you were benefiting from Force Throw, also, you know, your big units and stuff that you're trying to grow, like Revan, were just getting Force Throwed in him instantly. So, oh, guys, this is the biggest tragedy of them. He didn't move at all on my list, by the way. Like I said, I put him in like the C or D tier. I think I put him in the C tier just because I was like, yeah, guys, it's Revan. I got to put him in the C tier. I can't put him at the bottom. But I've had a full few months to get disappointed at time and time again by Revan that he's going in the D tier. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. It hurts me more than it hurts you. I promise. Okay. You know those Kit Fisto complainers out there that are like, there's a C tier or a B tier. Yeah, that was me. I'm like, oh, shit, Revan's not D tier. Guys, just C tier. Come on, let's bring him up. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I was coping. I'm not anymore. It is what it is. And lastly, we've got Anakin. This is another one. Okay, there's a few, like I said, that I got really wrong. Anakin was one of them. I think I put him in the A or B tier, really high. You know what this guy is? He's down here with Darth Revan, okay? This guy did nothing, all right? Trying to build your deck without another aspect is really tough. It is really, really tough. And that's not even all what's going on with Anakin. The only place I saw Anakin do anything was like Anakin Blue, and the only time this guy would be good was if you had the Anakin unit to take advantage of all your villainy cards in your discard pile. So it wasn't even Anakin as a leader himself. And guess what you can do? You can play a million other leaders that actually just played villainy cards in their deck and then did the exact same thing. Like if you were just playing, let's say, Darth Revan, and you're playing Anakin in your Vigilance Darth Revan deck, and then you decided to play a couple heroism cards like heck, I don't know, some random heroism card. It doesn't even matter what it is, and then just play Revan. You probably would end up with a very similar style of game. That's the only strength. Now, again, you could get that discount because you could use the Force to play a villainy non-unit card, which means you could play Overwhelming Barrage and Power the Dark Side and, you know, Fallen Lightsaber in your deck. The problem is that your opponent can keep you off the Force because you did not have enough Force units to play on turn 1. Again, let's say you're playing Vigilance, which is the aspect combination I would recommend with Anakin. You got Secretive Sage, Yaddle. Outside of that, there are a couple of other bad Force cards that you could play on turn 1. And then if they remove that and then you just couldn't get your Force generating, which is very, very common, by the way, the cards in your deck that were all villainy are suddenly bricks. Like they're hardcore bricks. Like imagine playing Overwhelming Barrage. That is a 9-cost Overwhelming Barrage. Power of the Dark Side. Now that's at least 5 resources. That's 5 resources. Power of the Dark Side. I mean, that is tough. Okay. Fallen Lightsaber, 7 resources. Like there were just absolute bricks in your hand. And so this thing would more often than not make your deck worse by trying to put all these cards in the deck because there was not enough consistency in the beginning stages. Honestly, if Anakin was like Heroism Blue and you could play a secondary aspect, this would be more interesting because you could have more, like let's say Heroism Blue Aggression, and you can get some other cards in there like Adi Gallia or whatever else you wanted to play on turn 1 in the earlier stages. Or maybe you're playing, I don't know, Cunning, like Youngling Padawan, and I don't know, whatever else. That could be interesting. He is a 5 to deploy 4/6, so he has a way better stat line than Revan. But like I said, that leader ability, that thing, it's a bait. It made your deck worse. And that was one thing that I was worried about. But I was a believer, okay? I was a believer. I put him in, like I said, low A tier or high B tier, something like that. And I was like, guys, the powerhouse is real. We could do some cool things. And that's probably because I just played 20 games or so with him and I had like a good run. And then I played way more games with him and I was like, dang, this is like super inconsistent. And I'm playing with bricks sometimes. And yes, Anakin will win me the game, but I need to draw Anakin. And so there are just too many things going on with Anakin. You could argue that he was C tier because he did do some cool things, like I said, because of the fact that you could play Anakin unit and because of all that. But honestly, similar to what I was thinking about Kit Fisto with like the leader side being so drastically bad. The fact that you had to play all these cards, or not that you had to, but the fact that your leader ability incentivized you to play all these cards that are unplayable in your deck otherwise when you can't pull the synergy off, yeah, that made your deck a lot worse, and that really, really sucked. So that's kind of where a lot of these leaders situate now. Now, again, if you look at like the C and D tier, not a single one of these guys showed up in any top 8s or really made any splash in the meta. There was no really solid plays for any of these. But I want to talk about my final thoughts on each of these tiers and all the leaders here. So going top from bottom, or top to bottom, S tier leaders, the Kylo Ren and Mezzo Talisman, these are the 2 leaders that people were talking about. These were the leaders that were like, dang, these might actually be meta defining. And honestly, Kylo Ren Red before Force Throw was a meta defining deck. It completely took the Galactic Champion by storm. It really did shift a lot of people's decks in what they were trying to plan for. Kylo Data Vault was also a secondary list that people were playing, and honestly was just more kind of immediately thought of as just kind of a value list, and it did really, really solid. It did well. And there was nothing really a problem with Kylo Ren. And he still, to this day, Kylo Data Vault, Kylo Red, still actually is like a top 10 list, right? It is still solid. Kylo Ren does still do very, very well. Now, in Townsend's case, this was one that people were way more hyped before the Force Throw ban. And after the Force Throw ban, she definitely fell off a ton. Like a ton, because people were really, really incentivized to kind of go with that full Force strategy and get that big payoff. But to be honest, Mother Townsend, even though she did win the Galactic Championship, she had a pretty bad conversion rate and never really did like amazingly to what we were all hoping for. Okay. In the A tier, Obi-Wan, he had a couple of top 8s, did okay. Huge drop off from the S to A. The B tiers, I mean, we had Qui-Gon, Snoke, and no Darth Balls, but Qui-Gon and Snoke at least showed up somewhere. And like I said, the C and D tiers never really did anything. If I were to put these on the list here, I would probably just drop all the leaders down a tier. And I mean, in the D tier case, I guess I would keep them in D tier, but they would be at the very low end of D tier, okay? It's just like, if you compare them to the rest of the leaders out there, like the S tier, we're talking about like leaders like right now, Cad Bane and Han 2, Han 1, Sabine, Boba Data Vault, or Boba 4, Kira, Yoda, Palp 1, Han 1 with a different base. We've got like Gar Saxon, Iden, I mean, like Thrawn, Darth Vader, Anakin, Wedge even is performing better than these leaders. I mean, we have like, I don't know, 15 different leaders ahead of a lot of these. The exception is Kylo. Again, Kylo might be at the very low end of S tier, high A tier. I would put him in the high A tier just because of his performance. Not nearly as good, like not nearly as good as those SS tier leaders. Talzin, maybe like mid to low A tier. And then Obi-Wan, immediately down into like the middle of B tier. Right? That's the placement of these leaders. There was none that really showed up and did a lot of work. Does that mean set 5 was bad? No, at least in my opinion. I thought the mechanic was kind of engaging. I thought it was pretty fun. I thought that the power level of cards was actually very strong with those mechanics implemented. Like if you look at the leaders that are strong right now, they are using those force bases. Like Han 2, it's force based. Han 1, a lot of it's force based. Yoda is using the force base. And that's not all. Like there are other decks out there that are not even using the force cards, but just playing powerful cards in general. Like Han in general, if you're playing Han Blue, you don't even need to play force, but you're playing Anakin because that card's good. If you're playing the Data Vault decks, you're playing Darth Vader because that card's just good, right? That's where the power level of set 5 came from. It wasn't from the leaders. It was not from the leaders at all. And we've seen that in the past where the leaders are the true powerhouses and you're just pairing them with old cards. This is the opposite. It's the cards that were good that were paired with old leaders that really helped them flourish. But yes, I think if you were really to push me on this and you were to say, well, Veiled, I mean, B and C tier or D tier, like they're all really relatively close. Yeah, I honestly do think that is the case. I don't think there's a big jump between like B and C or C and D tier. Like I think if you were to put all the C tiers in D tier, I would be like, okay with that, like whatever. Like these leaders are not very strong at all. I think Snoke and Qui-Gon and Darth Maul are a little bit better. So I would, be like, well, I think they did do at least something, and they were inconsistently, or and depending on the deck, or depending on the matchup, could do some things. But yeah, I mean, honestly, just the leaders from set 5, really not all that good. And this is just, I needed to separate them because I wanted to make a clear S tier. And I wanted to say, like, yes, there's an S tier, and then there was a big drop off, and then the A tier, and then there's another big drop off, and then there's a B tier, and then the rest of them are kind of in the same place. Like, Obi-Wan is significantly better than Qui-Gon in terms of the value that you can generate. And then, of course, Mother Talzin and Kylo, these are actual decks. Like, these are competitively viable decks that actually can win you tournaments, even though Talzin underperformed, and even though Kylo got nerfed after the Force throw ban quite significantly. So that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully you all enjoyed kind of roasting my previous rankings, and hopefully you all enjoyed kind of me poking fun at some of the leaders. Some of the things, obviously, it is my opinion at the end of the day, and I'm here to have some fun. So, like, if you're gonna say like, oh man, this guy and this Kit Fisto, I hate this guy, like, I don't know, you could say Kit Fisto is a C tier. I'm not gonna argue with that. Okay, he's at the top of D tier. I gave you guys that. All right, but I'm not moving Darth Revan. I'm too mad at him now. I'm too mad at him. He's just a D tier. I mean, he is a D tier, but like, I can't move him. I'm sorry, guys. So hopefully you all enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and let me know what your thoughts in the comment section down below. What leader was most disappointing for you? What leader did you have super high? What leader did you have super low that ended up being really good? Which, I mean, there's not really many options. It was either Obi-Wan, Talzin, or Kylo, right? But let me know. I love doing these videos. Like I said, I enjoy tier lists, and I enjoy how invested everyone gets, including myself. It's just a fun time. So I know some people will really take these to heart, but hopefully someone could just enjoy and just have a good time. So I'll see you all for the next one.